Lydia.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're doing this over the phone because of coronavirus and social distancing, so apologies if the sound can be a bit iffy at stage. Please bear with us.
We'd like to welcome you to our podcast series, It's All in Your Head, which focuses on the topic of mental health and MS. Why this topic? Well, here at the MS Trust, we receive thousands of questions on the topic of mood, depression, anxiety, and a bunch of other stuff that belongs under the mental health umbrella. In MS, we are getting quite good at treating the physical symptoms we may have, things like spasticity or pain, problems with our vision or bladder. Yet we are not as good at making sure our mind gets the same care.
But through this podcast series, we want to change that. We want to normalise the conversation around mental health and get people talking. And this episode is focusing on the topic of anxiety. This is certainly a word we hear a lot about at the moment.
Definitely. And anxiety is a feeling of worry or unease. And we know everyone feels anxious at some point. Though these feelings are usually short-lived and don't always affect day-to-day life, anxiety becomes a problem when it starts to affect your health and your enjoyment of life.
And anxiety is also a very common problem in MS. Living with MS can create feelings of loss, uncertainty and frustration, which understandably can make you feel anxious. But also the neurological changes that MS produces in the brain can actually lead to feelings of anxiety and low mood as well. So a lot of us that's living with MS have to deal with this on a daily basis. And then with all the uncertainty of the current times, it probably feels like 100 times worse than ever.
Yeah, I think with Corona lockdown easing, a lot of the advice is changing and people are being encouraged to get out more. But what does this actually mean for people who are shielding? I'm sure there's kind of a lot of feelings of anxiety around going out into this new normal, and some people might have actually quite enjoyed certain elements of lockdown, and then the feeling of actually going out into that big wide world can be really scary. I know, Helena, you've been shielding, haven't you?
Yeah, yes and no. I wasn't like on the official list to do shield, but because I'm on the MS medication that's reducing my white blood count and I was a bit borderline on it, I took the decision to shield. Also, I have a son who's asthmatic, so it felt like there was probably a better option. And then I was furloughed in April, and I certainly spent an awful lot of time at home since then, and in my head, kind of battling with all those thoughts of anxiety and stress.
Yeah, we should probably mention that about half of the staff at the MS Trust are furloughed at the moment, but we've got Helena back for a week, so we thought we'd record another podcast while she's here.
I've missed you, Lydia.
I miss you too.
I've missed working as well. I think perhaps spending all that time indoors trying to cope with like kids' schooling and online food orders made me go slightly bonkers.
So have you not been out much at all then, Helena?
I've sort of been going out for walks and runs to try and keep up with my exercise and things, but I tend to run away from people rather than see any people. I honestly feel really worried about the idea of going into a shop if I, hands on my heart. I haven't been since March, beginning of March. And I'm also going into hospital today to have my blood tested for my disease-modifying drugs monitoring. And I'm a bit freaked out. I'm sure really it will be set up and it will be fine. But I think it's just the idea of another person coming closer to me because, nobody has. And this is actually going to be a person who's going to be taking my blood. So, anyway, it sounds a little bit silly because obviously they will be super into their hygiene and things, but it's just weird because it's just the idea of it changing, I suppose, because it's been quite a long time now.
Actually, Helena, I don't think you are being silly. I think there'll be lots of people who will be feeling this way and feeling anxious, which is why we wanted to do this podcast. And in fact, you chatted with Mike, didn't you, about this?
Yes, I did. And I put the call out on our Facebook group to see if there was anybody who wanted to talk to us about anxiety, and got a response from Mike. And he was great. Should we have a listen?
Yeah, let's have a listen.
My name is Michael Gale. I'm 44 years old. I live in Cumbria with my wife and my two children. and also Loki the dog. I work for Cumbria Police as a detective in the Intel unit, and that's about it with an introduction, really.
And if you could start by telling us a little bit about when you were diagnosed with MS and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, well, about 10 years ago, I had optic neuritis. That's where I first started it in my right eye. And I went to the opticians, and the opticians diagnosed optic neuritis, but didn't link it to MS. So I was blissfully unaware what was to come, sort of a decade later, really. That was my first symptom, and then about 5 years ago, I was out running. And I felt my leg dragging a little bit as I was running, my left leg. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, maybe one of my muscles is going, or, my age or something like that, really. So it just carried on. And what I found out was actually foot drop. And it got worse over a period of time. So I went to the doctors, and the doctors didn't diagnose anything. They said it was just me, and it was nothing to worry about. And even then, they didn't put the link to optic neuritis and foot drop, and the classic symptoms, really.
Yeah.
So it went on, and my symptoms got worse. I started to feel fatigue was kicking in. I didn't even know what fatigue was at that point. I just thought it was just me being tired, with a young family and a stressful job and things like that. I just thought it was just life, really. But it was fatigue, and it completely zonked me out. And then my left arm started to tingle, started to go numb. I was getting cramps in my calf. So, of course, you go to Dr. Google then straight away. And I Googled the symptoms which I had. And as soon as I put in optic neuritis, to be honest with you, it came up as MS.
Yeah.
So I went back to the doctor, and I spoke to the doctor again. And even then, still, they weren't not taking me seriously. But even then, they didn't want to refer me or anything like that. So I went away again, and then luckily I went to see another doctor I hadn't seen before, and she was very, very good. And as soon as she saw optic neuritis, she was like, right, go to a specialist, because it's the only way we're gonna get this sorted. So I went for an MRI scan, and that was April last year. I went for that. And I had 3 lesions which showed up. There was 2 on my spinal cord and 1 on my brain. I went to see a neurologist, and he pretty much there and then diagnosed that I had MS. Because it didn't really come as that much of a shock to me. I know some people think it's quite a shock to them, but to me, I kind of knew I had it because of my symptoms, and because I'm quite lucky to Google things. We're quite lucky nowadays that you can sort of look up things. It's not looking into a medical encyclopedia and trying to work out things. It's kind of there, and there's a lot of information on various websites like the MS Trust. You can check your symptoms and things like that on there. So it wasn't too much of a shock. It was more what the future would hold, which was my concerns, really.
How are you doing today? Like, what main symptoms do you experience?
Yeah, my symptoms are I'm quite lucky, really, that I've still got use of my legs. Even I walk with a stick now. My left side's quite numb. My left leg drags quite a bit. My left arm's numb. My 3 fingers on my hand are numb, so I struggle to grip with that. I've recently, in the last sort of couple of months, I've started walking with a stick. Not every day. Some days I'm okay, better than others. I think that's what a lot of people have as well. Some days they have good days and bad days, and I think it's like that with this and other conditions and just life, really. Sometimes fatigue's a big thing for me. it hits me, and when it hits me, it really hits me, sort of thing. I'm good for nothing. It really zonks me out, and I was just expecting, when you say think fatigue, you just think it's being tired, but it's nothing like that at all.
No, it really isn't.
It's a hard thing to adjust to. So the left side is my issue, and fatigue, really. As I say, compared to a lot of people, I suppose I've got away quite lightly to start with. But that's sort of my... now and again, my speech will go. I've got to concentrate on what I'm saying with regards to getting my words out and things like that. So sometimes I get a bit of brain fog. But that's it, really.
We're obviously in a bit of a weird time at the moment with the whole corona lockdown is easing up, but it's still lockdown for a lot of us.
It is, yeah.
How's that affecting both sort of your symptoms, but like maybe other things like your mental health and anxiety, which we're talking about today?
Yeah. Well, with the anxiety, I've suffered from depression and anxiety for about 4 or 5 years now. And again, I believe that's a symptom of MS that might be linked to that. I've been on fluoxetine for that period of time as well.
Yeah.
And it's controlling it quite well, to be honest. I've had a few anxious times with lockdown. What's going to happen? Obviously, how do we stand? Because at first, I was self-isolating, and my wife would go shopping and she'd come home and she'd spray all the shopping down, so I knew the shopping was clean and things like that, and wouldn't let me out of the door and all that sort of thing. So that make you anxious. You think, well, what if I get, what if I get COVID or something like that? What's going to happen? So I felt quite anxious with regards to that, and due to being in the police as well, and working from home, and I'm quite lucky. Most of my job now, due to my condition, is office-based.
Right.
So I've been quite lucky that I can work from home.
Yeah.
But the anxiety of not being in the office and knowing that your colleagues are there and they're working hard, and there's like a misconception, really, that people who work from home just sat at home watching morning TV and things like that, and you do think that, even though we're not, and it's definitely not like that. You just, it's just the thought and the anxiety of, like, what are people thinking about me? What are people thinking I'm doing? Do people think I'm lazy? Do people think I'm not? So again, that does give you the anxiety with that and the lockdown, and it's just so many different parts of it which give us the anxiety, really.
But sort of looking forward then, with things easing up, what have you got some sort of plan for going back into the office, or are you working from home for the foreseeable future?
At the moment, I'm quite lucky. To be honest, there's a lot of positives come out of this for me with having MS. I'm going to go back 2 days a week very soon into the office. I'll go back on a Tuesday and a Thursday, just to sort of integrate back with my office colleagues, to be honest, because we still got contact with each other. So I haven't lost contact with them. With Skype and all sorts of things which you can use in Teams and all that. I haven't lost contact. I might as well have been sat in the office with them, to be honest. But I know the constabulary are looking at making things a little bit easier for people to work from home, which will help me a lot. I find that if I'm at home, my symptoms lessen to a certain degree. Now I've got over the guilt and the anxiety and things like that. I find that that I prefer working from home. But then again, I think it's good for your mental health to go into work and sort of interact with people. Get into the office chat, things like that. And I know it can get a little bit tedious sometimes with some offices, but I'm quite lucky in my office. We're all quite close. There's like 6 or 7 of us in the office, and we're all quite close. So I think it's good for my personal mental health to get back into work a couple of days a week, just to have that personal contact as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully going forward, I'll be able to do that.
I think that's what I've missed a lot, sort of chatting to my colleagues and just getting, ideas and even just talking rubbish sometimes, but it's just that kind of interaction.
Right. Yeah, it's just that normal, well, as normal as we can do in this climate, isn't it? But it's just a normal way of life, really.
Do you think people have gotten better to talk about things like mental health and anxiousness and things like depression during this, because we've been maybe forced to be a little bit more open about how we're feeling?
Yeah, I do actually. I do think a lot of people are opening up a lot more now, because this is something which is, well, it's never happened in our lifetime, is it? It's something that might not happen again in another generation, but it's kind of, I think it's given a lot of people a little bit of a wake-up call, really, and giving them the opportunity to think about their own mental health and their own personal struggles with things like MS. It's maybe giving people that opportunity to sort of take stock and to talk to people about things, and you've got a lot more time to think, I think, during lockdown, and I think it's helped a lot of people come out with their concerns about their mental health as well. Yeah, which does help.
It's good discussions to have. I mean, we've been wanting to do these podcasts specifically talking about sort of mental health, because we find, like with MS, it's a lot of, symptoms get treated. If you got optic neuritis, you might get steroids, or, if you got problems with tremor, there might be other things. But mental health, quite often people just struggle on, don't they? And then it's quite a British thing.
It is, isn't it? It is. I think you just need to look at the people who are there to support you, really. I'm really lucky. I've got a great wife who supports me throughout. She's always there to talk to, so I'm lucky. My family are quite close as well, who I can speak to. And ever since I was having issues with depression before diagnosis, I've learned to be quite open about it. I wasn't the sort of person who would talk about it. When growing up and you had mental health issues, people didn't really know what it was. And it's nice nowadays that there's a whole lot of help for people out there. And just the advice is just go and get it. Yeah. Go and get help. If you've got any issues whatsoever, speak to somebody, because there's always somebody there who will be able to help you, and there's always somebody there who will know how you feel. And it's just really good advice to speak about it. Yeah. I know as well. I've tried meditation as well. I find that really, really helps. And it's something I never would have looked at all. I would have just thought, no, I'm not doing that. Why would you want to do meditation? It's all a little bit strange. But since I've got into it, and there's loads of different apps which you can use, is Calm, which I use. I use that app, and I try to do it once a day. I know you're supposed to do it sort of religiously, really, but I try and do it once a day, and I find that really, really helps with bringing you back to the moment where you're living, living just in the present moment and things like that. So I found that really, really helps. And if there's anybody thinking, I don't want to do meditation, and why would I want to do things like that? And it all seems a bit tree huggy, I suppose, to a certain degree. Yeah. It's definitely is. Give it a go, because it works for me. I've had a few people ask me what why do you do it? And they've tried it and thought, God, it really does work, doesn't it? So yeah, mindfulness and sort of meditation is a brilliant tool to have. I didn't mention it earlier, I'm not on any medication at the moment because I'm relapsing remitting, but they think it's more secondary progressive rather than that. They think I'm in between the two at the moment.
Yeah.
So my consultant he doesn't want to put me on any medication at the moment. So I've been trying to manage my symptoms with diet and mindfulness and things like that. And I find that has given me a bit more energy and help with my mental health as well. By exercising a little bit more, because I've never been into exercising. It's never really been my thing, but I've started doing a bit of strength training and things like that, just to try and combat that anxiety as well, which seems to have helped. Yeah. As I said, I'm just not an exercise sort of person, and people say exercise makes you feel better, but I tend to try and do a little bit a week. And it is helping my mental health by doing that as well.
Yeah, I'm a runner, and I can get really preachy and go, oh, it's fantastic, it makes me feel so much better and blah blah blah. But it's hard, because when you find something that you think works, you want to tell the world and kind of go, oh, you try it too. But then you realize that actually I'm coming across as quite annoying probably. But I think it's so good to find something that works for you, because I think all the research says that exercise is really good for your mental health and anxiety and all those good chemicals that it produces in your brain when you're doing it.
Yeah, that's right. And I've been doing a lot more since I've been working from home and since lockdown. I tend to have thought, right, give me 10 minutes. I'm going to go and do something. I'm going to, even if it's just going for a walk, just exercising a little bit more. And I've noticed that's a positive which has come out of all this, if anything, is I've exercised a lot more. Yeah. And I get to help with the stress and anxiety.
If you had like one parting thing to say, like one bit of advice or something for people to do who are feeling anxious, what would that be?
Well, my advice is to just stay strong. Confining people, if you're feeling anxious due to the coronavirus and life in general, is confining people. Speak to people. Don't hide behind the stigma of mental health and anxiety, of not speaking about it. As soon as you do speak to somebody, you'll speak to somebody and they'll understand. And as soon as you speak to that person, a massive weight gets lifted off your shoulders. And to be honest, I think it's very good advice. Try mindfulness as well. Mm-hmm. Definitely try that. It might work for you, it might not. If it doesn't work, you haven't lost anything. Yeah. So my advice would be that: look after yourselves and try and be as strong as you can. Try and eat as good as well as you can. And if you feel down or anything like that, speak to somebody. There's always somebody, even if it's not, if you haven't got a close family network, close friend network, anything like that, there's always people who you can speak to. There's always somebody on the end of the phone, and just use that service, really.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, talk to your GP, or there's lots of great charities out there, like Calms and Samaritans, and there's like you say, there is help. There is people to talk.
Yeah, there is, and I think that's the key thing. Is don't suffer on your own. Mental health's a big grey area. It hangs on your shoulders, and this is not a very nice place to be in. And if there's anybody sort of struggling with MS and anxiety during these times as well, is to definitely speak to somebody.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, this is where it would be an advert. But as we're a charity, we don't do that. So instead, we would like to take the opportunity to tell you about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Our website, mstrust.org.uk, has tons of information and resources for people affected by MS.
In fact, there is a section in our A to Z of MS about anxiety. So if you go to mstrust.org.uk/A to Z/anxiety, this includes information on why we get anxious and how it can be managed and treated.
Right, we're back. It was really interesting to hear from Mike there and his feelings about his MS diagnosis, dealing with anxiety and depression, and lockdown and everything that we've been going through right now.
Yeah, I found it really inspiring speaking to Mike. He was just very positive about things. And I felt, again, it's amazing we get these people who are so open to talk about things that previously people have just like locked down and not spoken about, the depression and all these things have always been something that we've kind of forgot to talk about. So, yeah, I felt that it was really interesting what he had to say. And I thought some good advice there as well. I think, especially with things like meditation and sort of just getting, looking after your mind is probably a really good way of dealing with these feelings of anxiety.
Definitely. And in order to help you both with your worries, how about we chat with an expert? Here is clinical psychiatrist Jo Johnson, who we chatted with earlier.
Hi everyone, today we're talking about anxiety, which is something I'm sure a lot of our listeners would have experienced. So in particular, we're talking about anxieties over kind of coming out of lockdown as things start to go back to normal following the coronavirus outbreak. So we're here with Jo Johnson. She's a neuropsychologist and she's going to answer a few questions for us about anxiety and also talk us through some kind of strategies that you can try yourself as well. So first of all, Jo, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your job role and what it involves?
Sure. So my name's Jo Johnson. I'm a consultant neuropsychologist, which means I'm a clinical psychologist specialising in conditions that have a neurological origin. So that would include MS, also brain injury, brain tumours, Parkinson's, that sort of thing. I work in the Sussex and Surrey area. I worked for the NHS until 2008, but since then I've been self-employed. I have a long association with the MS Trust, going back a very long, probably 2 decades or something. So have great appreciation of the work that you guys do.
Oh, brilliant. That's lovely for you to say. And you've contributed to some lovely kind of blogs and stuff in the past that I'm sure people have found really, really useful. So our first kind of question is around anxiety. So something that a lot of people are likely to be familiar with, perhaps even more so at the moment. So the first question we had is anxiety normal? Is it normal for us to have anxious feelings?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only is it normal, but it's protective and it's healthy and it's important. So often when people pitch up to see me, they really want rid of their anxiety. And I always point out that they would be dead by the end of the day if I rid them of their anxiety, because anxiety stops us walking into the road when the traffic light says green. It stops us being stupid in a whole range of ways. So I think our modern ways often want to make it into a symptom or pathologize it, whereas certainly the model of working that I use doesn't see it like that. It sees it as part of the flawed human condition. It sees emotion as a messenger. Anxiety tells us about what we care about, that we care about our health and our family, we care about our life and thriving rather than getting sick.
So for people with MS specifically, are they more likely to experience anxiety? And if so, why?
Yes, definitely. So there's good evidence, I think, from the research that there's much higher levels of anxiety in people with MS. I think the jury's still a bit out about causes. I guess, the guesses include we all have a genetic predisposition. So personally, I'm a very anxious person by nature. I get that from my dad. I've passed it on to 2 of my 4 children. So we have those predispositions, and then MS impacts particularly a certain area of the brain that makes it more likely to suffer from low mood and anxiety in a more disabling way. But also being diagnosed with MS is an anxiety provoking situation. You know, MS is a bummer in that we can't predict it. Even the best doctors in the country can't tell you whether you'll have a relatively benign course or whether you will be serious by it. That's hard. You know, we know that the humans, as humans, we don't cope well with uncertainty. Also, MS kind of often strikes people when they are in their 20s, 30s and 40s. And that means, you know, you're just getting your head around having a family or buying a house or, you know, thriving in your career. And suddenly your plans that you had in your head are taken away. I think the other thing I would say about that is, in some ways, we have to resist the temptation to overanalyze the cause, because, you know, if somebody's sitting in front of me and I'm able to say, look, 14.5% of this anxiety is from your genetics, and another 32% is from your MS, and then the final percentage is, you know, through just life or COVID. How does that help, really? So I always kind of, you know, suggest people don't spend too much time worrying about the why.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, I think. You mentioned briefly that you work in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a type of psychological therapy. Could you maybe just give us a bit of an introduction about what that is and what it would have to say about anxiety?
Sure. So it's been described as one of the 3rd wave cognitive behavioural therapies. So I would expect a lot of people will have heard the letters CBT, which was cognitive behavioural therapy. And all that means really is that your thinking will have an impact on your feelings and behaviours. Those 3 things interact. So a very simple example might be, if I saw you walking down the street and I know you well and you don't say hello. So if in my head I think, oh, Gemma really hates me, she's ignored me deliberately, which is so like all my other friends. I don't really have any friends. I'm very rejected by everybody. And then I might go home and drink too much wine and go to bed. So you can see how you just walking past me and not acknowledging me has sent me on a bit of a spiral of thinking that then kind of changes my behaviour in some way and how I'm feeling. But imagine exactly the same situation where you walk past me and you don't see me, and I maybe chase after you and say, hey Gemma, you haven't seen me, and you go, oh, I've not got my up-to-date glasses yet. Or I think, oh, poor Gemma, maybe she's a bit in her own head and I must phone her when I get home. So you can see how exactly the same objective situation could produce a range of different thoughts and feelings and thus behaviours. So that's kind of what cognitive behavioural therapy says, that actually very few things are objective. It's very much about the way what our heads do with them. And the kind of head that we have is very dependent on our past. So I've been wired in a certain way by parents and experience and genetics. So I might understand situations, interpret situations better than you, different to you. So that's why we know there are such diverse reactions to a diagnosis of MS, or even being in something tragic like a bombing. You know, different people react very differently, and psychologists think this is the reason. It's to do with how you make sense of it. So that's kind of CBT, and ACT is an extension of that. It says very similar things as a starting point, but perhaps where ACT differs is it's much less into labeling things as symptoms. So CBT often starts with this person has depression or anxiety or OCD, whereas ACT is much less into that. ACT sees all these things as part of the flawed human condition, and we're all kind of struggling in similar ways with similar things along a spectrum, really. So that's the first thing. It doesn't pathologize thoughts and feelings and sensations. The second thing is it doesn't aim to reduce those things. So the symptoms of anxiety are seen as just part of the human range of thoughts, feelings, images, emotions and sensations. So the ACT model talks about learning to relate differently to our inside stuff. So we can't stop it. You know, I just had a random thought that was like, I'm so rambling on this podcast, this is terrible, and then my stomach kind of did a little bit of a leap, which was like, oh my goodness, you know, maybe I should just sign off now and give Gemma a break. But you know, I can just notice that thought and I can give it a bit of a nod. It's a very common thought. It comes with a package of thoughts like not good enough psychologist, not good enough at whatever I'm doing. So whereas CBT would perhaps encourage people to spend a lot of time arguing with those thoughts in order to reduce the anxiety so you don't have it, ACT just kind of encourages you to relate differently to it, to know it's there, to name it, but actually not to believe it, not to buy into it, and to just get on with what's important.
Thanks for explaining all that. That's a really kind of different perspective on kind of dealing with those emotions, that it's almost like you're becoming more self-aware and trying not to let them overwhelm you so much. Do you want to go into a bit more detail on that? So perhaps go through a few sort of practical exercises that people can try to manage their anxiety or respond to it differently.
Definitely. So let's start by thinking why we get into these problems with anxiety. So as I just said there, I had a really tiny experience of anxiety, and the world is a very anxiety-provoking place subjectively at the moment. We're having news alerts all the time about how many people have died of COVID, you know, how to reduce your risk. People with MS need to self-isolate for way longer than everybody else. You know, the danger alert for our minds has been massively increased, and we could easily spend all day focusing on those thoughts and feelings. So what happens is, you know, you get a thought, I might get COVID, my whole family might die of COVID, and very quickly your heart starts racing, your breathing speeds up, your chest gets tight, and then my mind's like, oh, I know this feeling, and it starts to remember all the times in the past when I've been anxious, and maybe when I've not coped very well with my anxiety. Then I start to feel like really cross. Why is it me who feels anxiety? Why isn't Gemma feeling anxiety? And then I start to think, oh, I'm so pathetic, this is so embarrassing, I shouldn't be feeling like this. Everybody else in the country is not panicking about COVID, they're going back to work without a huge fuss. Why me? And then I feel even more panicky, and perhaps my mind throws in an image of when I've had a panic attack and other people are looking on in their judgmental way, and we kind of compare our own insides with other people's outsides a lot and think it's only me. And what we end up doing then, when we end up in this massive struggle, the anxiety gets bigger and bigger and stickier and harder to cope with. And when we don't like bad feelings, we don't like bad thoughts. So what we end up doing is we enter into a battle to stop these things. And we all have our own favourite things. So for me, when I have feelings I don't want, whether it's anxiety or low mood or feelings of rejection, I eat junk. I find myself in the local shop with a bar of chocolate in my face quite quickly, or I start blaming my partner for not cleaning properly or not having gone to the shops. or I start online shopping. So they're my 3 tells. I always know when those things are going on that I've got feelings I don't like coming up. So first thing is we can notice our tells, and they're telling us that something's going on. So that's important for awareness. But we all do stuff with our feelings to get rid of them. And some of those things, if we do them a lot, I mean, we have to do them a little bit, don't we? Because that's what we like. And sometimes we have to cope with things without showing other people. But when we start being irritable all the time and blaming other people all the time and shouting at our kids and going to bed rather than going out or refusing to go back to work, after a while, life becomes very meaningless. A comfort zone is just that. It's very comfortable, but often not very life enhancing, not very encouraging or exciting. If we withdraw from friendships, our relationships deteriorate and life doesn't feel so good. So that's the reason really that we don't want to end up in this pathological struggle against our difficult thoughts and feelings, and that's why ACT teaches us to relate differently. So the first thing we can do is to just right now notice. So Gemma, I'm just going to talk you through a bit of a noticing exercise. It's kind of a mental sit-up, I suppose. So if you're willing, close your eyes. Don't do this if you're driving. Close your eyes. If you're not willing to do that, just stare ahead, or if you are driving, just stare ahead. And just kind of notice your feet. So push your feet down. Notice whether they're the same temperature to each other. You don't need to respond to me. Just kind of notice it in your own head. And then notice your hands. Notice the position of your hands. Notice what you can feel under your fingers. And then notice your mind. Notice whether your mind is calm or whether it's busy. Whether you're having thoughts about, what's this all about? This is a bit odd. I'm not sure I like this. I've got to get on with the rest of my day. Or whether your mind's just a bit empty. Just notice your mind. And then notice your body as a whole. Notice your posture. Notice any areas of stiffness. And notice your chest and your stomach and your throat and your head. And see if you can see any emotions. See if you can notice any anxiety, any sadness. And if not, just notice what it feels like to not have any feelings. And then open your eyes and connect with your body. So move which parts of your body you can. Have a stretch. Shrug your shoulders. Blink. Turn your head from side to side. Have a wiggle in your chair if you can. So outside of these thoughts and feelings, we have a body we can connect into. And then notice there's a world outside of this body. So see what you can hear. Have a look round your space and see what you can see. Have a big in-breath and notice what you can smell. I noticed that I haven't done the washing up as quickly as I should have done. There's a bit of a stale odour. Notice if you can taste anything. And then notice that there's you and me here working together to produce this podcast. So that was the first step of awareness, waking up from autopilot and noticing what's going on. And I just wonder what you noticed in that few minutes.
It's interesting, really. I think I've become a lot more aware of what's going through my head, what I'm worrying about, how I'm feeling, how my body feels, and then also what's going on around me and different smells and things. It's kind of like you're just taking more of a step back and just pausing a minute.
Indeed, and the more we do that, we spend a lot of time in this country worrying about bodies. and particularly flabby bodies. We really should be paying much more attention to flabby minds, because what we know is when we spend a lot of time in our heads worrying about the future or thinking about the past in our mind TARDISes, it's almost like our minds get very flabby and they find it hard to pay attention. They get very fatigued with all of this mental effort and TARDIS wandering. So actually, if you have MS, you may well be exacerbating your symptoms of cognition and fatigue by wandering about in your mind and not noticing you're doing this. So some people would say, oh, this is really similar to mindfulness, and in some ways it is, but in other ways it depends how you understand mindfulness. So what we're doing is we're not trying to get rid of anything inside of us, we're trying to wake up and have a look at it, so we can ask ourselves important questions like, am I in my mind TARDIS? And would I actually be better to come and concentrate on what Gemma's saying? Am I ruminating about things that may never happen? And maybe I'd be better off enjoy life more, chatting to my children or looking at the sea. So the idea is to wake up, and each time you do something like that, even notice a taste, notice a smell, notice a thought, notice a feeling. It's like doing a mental sit-up. And I'm sure you know this. I mean, I once went to a personal trainer and he told me how to do sit-ups, but I didn't ever do them. And I have a very flabby core. I won't prove that to you because it will be unpleasant. But, you know, this is the same. If we don't practice these mental sit-ups, we won't improve our mind ability to stay present and be aware. So, you know, as your day goes on, maybe attach that awareness to a regular activity. The most obvious one at the moment is hand washing. So every time you wash your hands, rather than just doing it while you're on autopilot, see if you can get present, see if you can notice the smell of the soap, see if you can notice as the water drips on your hands, see if you can notice the temperature of the water and the feelings as you clean each part of your hand. And that will give you a mental sit-up just for a couple of minutes. Or if you're sitting in your wheelchair, you can smell, or you can turn your head to get a slightly different view. Or if you're able to drive, you can just notice as you turn your key in the ignition or start your car, you can perhaps notice what's on your mind, notice what you can see or hear. Do you get the idea?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, and I like the idea of doing it when you're washing your hands, because I'm sure that's something people are doing a lot more often than they usually would be.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the first one of ACT skills, really gaining awareness, coming off autopilot, stop being a zombie.
Yeah.
Because then you're not so bullied by your thoughts and feelings. So the second set of skills is, well, if we wake up, we might notice what our minds are saying. And often our minds are saying quite dark things. They're like overprotective parents or a bit of an annoying friend. You know, they're constantly going, oh, be careful, don't do that. What have you just said there? That was a bit stupid, wasn't it? You know, maybe you should just shut up now. I think people are getting a bit bored, or you're going to die definitely of COVID. Have you really washed your hands enough? They're constantly over your shoulder, these minds. They never really shut up. And some of us, and I would include myself in that, I mean, I'm a classic overthinker. I wish sometimes I could just turn it off for a few minutes. But, you know, once we start waking up to how much this is going on, we can start relating to it differently. And we don't like a bad feeling. So when my mind says, hey, you might get COVID, your children might get COVID, you might all die of COVID, I don't like that. And our natural tendency is to want to get rid of that thought. I don't want to hear that. I'm going to put a lot of effort into distracting myself, working more, having some wine, eating some junk, so I don't have to hear that. I don't want to listen to it. So an interesting thing about the ACT model is it says, well, if you turn towards it, it processes it differently, and actually this is a much easier way to handle it. It's much less of a struggle, it's much less fatiguing, it's much less cognitively mind sapping. so you can pay attention to what you need. So I don't know if you could throw up instantly a kind of difficult thought. What difficult thoughts have you had today?
I suppose worrying that I've got quite a lot on that I need to get done, and I'm not kind of efficient enough, and I'm not kind of good enough because I'm not kind of achieving everything I should have done.
Okay, so let's take that I'm not good enough, because I think there's probably no one listening to this who doesn't have a version of this.
Yeah.
So in most of what we do, our minds are whispering over our shoulders, not good enough, too busy, too lazy, too rubbish, etc. So I wonder if you have a piece of A4 paper,
Yep.
whether you could write in the bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah.
So just write in the bottom right-hand corner, I am not good enough.
Yeah.
So we're just starting by kind of naming that thought, acknowledging that thought. And I want to just read it, get quite loved up with it, and notice the feelings that come up in your body as you read that. What happens?
I think you just feel a bit of wave of kind of negativity and quite sad.
Yeah, it's not nice, is it? And when we get a thought like that, our temptation is to argue with it. Oh, I am good enough. I'm working really hard. Or we get defeated, give up, go home. What's the point? Resign. But actually, try this. Put in front of that, I am not good enough, I am having the thought that. So read the whole sentence to me.
I am having the thought that I'm not good enough.
What's that like as you read that?
I suppose it doesn't feel quite so personal from that perspective.
Okay. So there's a little bit more space between it.
Yeah.
It gives it a little less power, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely.
So and then finally, can you write I am noticing before the second part? I am noticing that. So perhaps now read out the whole sentence, 3 parts.
I am noticing that I am having the thought that I'm not good enough.
What does that seem like? What happens there?
It feels a bit more like you're kind of distancing it a bit.
Yeah. So there's Gemma in the room and she's noticing a thought, like maybe you'd notice a bad smell. It becomes less meaningful, less powerful. And actually that's an exercise. If you practice it, it will really diminish the impact of your thoughts on you. If they're big and old and sticky, it will take quite a bit of practice. So you do have to do that. But now, because I've practiced so much on paper, I can do that driving along. So there's a rare session or meeting I don't drive away from thinking, not good enough psychologist. So now in my head, I can think, oh, I noticed that thought. I'm having the thought that I'm not a good enough psychologist. I'm noticing the thought that I'm not a good enough psychologist. And actually, quite quickly now I can move on from that because I do it so much. So that's first skill. A second skill to get rid of thought content can just be to repeat it or write it out like you're doing lines. So you can try, let's do this together. So when I say go, we'll just repeat not good enough. So go, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. You can sing it a bit, do it fast, do it slow. Not good enough, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. Get the idea?
Yeah.
And interestingly, you can do that with kind of powerful words that have sabotaged you for a long time, like fat or COVID or bad mum, and it diminishes its power over you. And you can see how this is the opposite to struggling to get rid of a thought. So how about this? I'm just going to give you like a minute to think whatever you want to think, to let your mind wander. But the only thing you mustn't think about is chocolate. So don't think about delicious brown, silky smooth chocolate in a purple covering, okay?
Okay.
So just think, but don't think about chocolate. How's it going?
It's tricky.
What happens when you try not to think about something?
You automatically think about it and link anything else you were thinking about to it as well.
Absolutely. So that's why we're doing this, because the effort it takes to not think about something is hard, but also it doesn't work. The more you try not to think about it, the more you think about it. So first of all, one of the ACT skills is around gaining awareness. So noticing what I'm thinking and feeling. And when we do that, we can relate to the thoughts differently, so we can have them rather than try and get rid of them. And you can do the same sort of thing with feelings. Essentially, it's about noticing it in your body, naming it. Here's anxiety, but not struggling to get rid of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really helpful technique, actually, rather than fighting against it, just accepting that that's what you're feeling at the moment.
Marvellous. And the third core pillar of ACT skills is about knowing what's important. So when I first read this research, I thought that's a complete heap of junk. It can't be true. But people who know their values find life more meaningful. People who know their values are physically fitter. People who know their values enjoy work more, have better relationships and better health. I found that very shocking and unbelievable. But the more training I've done, giving people an opportunity to think explicitly about their values, the more I realised that actually that's the truth. So when we're running about like zombies on autopilot, it's very hard to know what's important. Like, what actually are we doing here? Why are we doing it in any given moment? And we're so tied up with trying to get rid of what we don't want. So frequently when people come to see me or talk to me, they know they don't want their bad feelings. They know they don't want their bad thoughts. They don't want to feel anxious. They don't want their MS. But actually they've thought very little about what they do want. And that's what values are. Values are what and who is important to me. And values are personally chosen. So I can't tell you what your values should be, and you can't tell me. And it's interesting, I think, because we have a lot of values we feel we have to have as women, as men, as workers, as people at home. We're told we need to think and feel a certain way. So it's important to work out what's important to you, because otherwise, what even is the point of relating differently to your difficult thoughts and feelings and liberating yourself from that if you don't know what you want to do instead? So I'll ask a few questions and you can think about the answers. This might be more for the audience. If you didn't have anxiety, what would you do? If I could just wave a magic wand over you right now and free you up from any difficult thoughts and feelings, what would you want to do with the rest of today? And that might help you show what's important. Another question would be, how about you thinking about this, Gemma? I don't know how old you are, but what about if at your next big birthday, 20, 30, 40, 50, someone stands up and truthfully says what they love about you? What would you want them to say? Gemma is...
Oh, that's really difficult.
Yeah,
I suppose someone who cares and that they feel they can talk to if they need to, and someone that's reliable. Okay,
so reliable, kind, does their best, works hard, cares about things. What kind of things would you like people to say? Oh, Gemma always did that, was adventurous, or loved flowers, or what kind of things would you like them to be saying?
I suppose, yeah, she was just always there to talk to. She loved kind of being outside and going for walks and working on the allotment and things like that.
Oh, nice. So you've really thrown up some what and who's important there, some kind of values, words, kindness, caring, nature, out in the fresh air. Many people don't know what's important to them. They often know more about what isn't important. And there's a new app which is called the Values Card Sort, and you can just go through that and it gives you some guidance about your values. But if you look up any work associated with the acceptance and commitment therapy model, you will find values options within that. So if you don't know what's important, you can't really decide whether you're on track or not. So that's why it's important to think about, what might be important to you, because right at the beginning, I listed what comes up inside of us to sabotage us having the life we wanted. And I included some things that come up inside of you that could be best described under the acronym of TIMES, which are thoughts, images, memories, emotions, and sensations. So think about this. We can move with the times. So instead of trying to get rid of difficult thoughts, difficult feelings, difficult memories, emotions, and sensations, we can take action towards our values with them there. So it's almost like they're in a big rucksack. It's quite light because we can relate to it differently, but we can still move. So once we get an idea about our values, we can then actually plan ahead. So I can think, well, given that I care about other people and I want to be a good friend, what thing could I do even in the next hour? What small action I could do to put my values into action? If you can't put it into action, it's not a value. So perhaps I could text my friend who I know isn't very well and just say, how are you doing? Perhaps I could go inside and make my husband a cup of tea. Perhaps I could go out for a walk, even though it might be a small one, with my mask on. So can you see how actually if you have values but you don't put them into action, it's almost like my dad has a mobile phone that he won't switch on because he says it will just disturb him, and he has early dementia. So it's a bit annoying because we brought him a phone to try and help him stay safe, and then he won't switch it on. But people that have values and don't put them into action are a bit like my dad. It's like, oh, you've got this huge potential in your pocket, but you're never going to use it or do it. So once you've become a bit more aware of your difficult thoughts and feelings, you can then start to practice the skills to relate to them a bit differently. And then you can start taking action towards your values, what is important, by, just choosing. You could choose tomorrow will be gratitude day and think about how many times you could put that value into action during your day, even if you're housebound. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think the values part is kind of the difficult bit, because it really requires you to kind of think about what's really important to you. But it's amazing. You can do a very small thing, like texting your friend or something, and even that small thing is working towards those values.
Absolutely, and the size of the step doesn't matter. I mean, imagine, I'm very close to the south coast, so if I wanted to get to Scotland, I would get in my car, and even going to our local shops would be north. So I'd be a bit closer to Scotland. And actually, it's a bit like that. Values are a direction. I am never going to get to the point where we could say, Joe is kind. You can't tick them off. That's the difference between a value and a goal. If you can tick it off, went for a walk, got married, got promotion. They're goals. Values are, you can't achieve them. You can just go in the right direction.
Thank you so much to Jo there. What a really interesting chat with some practical exercises that I think we could all benefit from. I've got Gemma with me now, who's Gemma, what did you take away from that conversation with Jo? Has it made you look at things a little bit differently?
Yeah, I think I would say I found the exercises really useful. I think it did feel a bit uncomfortable initially because it's something completely different. But I think ACT as a technique is really interesting because it's kind of encouraging you to approach your feelings a little bit differently. So feelings like anxiety, it's encouraging you to look at them and deal with them in a different way. So I think the exercises showed that you don't kind of have to fight against those feelings. You can just acknowledge that they're there, and by doing that makes them feel a little less powerful and kind of stops them overwhelming you so much. So I think for anyone with MS that's listening and is maybe feeling quite anxious about life changing after lockdown, then have a go at one of the exercises. They're only a few minutes long, and it might just give you that little bit of time to stop and think and give you a bit of perspective and acknowledge your feelings and maybe stop them overwhelming you so much. So I'd just say, give them a go.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone listening would like to find out more about acceptance and commitment therapy and how it can help people with MS, we have a page at mstrust.org.uk, and this has information on sort of the latest research into this therapy and some more exercises you can try. And remember, if you have any questions about MS, we are here for you. Our inquiry service is available from Monday to Friday, except UK bank holidays, from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. Outside those hours, you can leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So it's a really tough time for charities at the moment. And so if you'd like to support this MS Trust and you value the information and support that we provide, please go to our website, the page www.mstrust.org.uk/MS doesn't stop, and you can make a donation there. And there's lots of other ways you can get involved with our work too. So have a look, and yes, please help if you can.
And, we like it if you get social with us as well. So you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Get in touch. And like they say, like and subscribe. I guess there's also a lot of other charities out there who are going through, for people who are going through struggles with their mental health. There's Samaritans. They're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on 116 123. And there's also other charities who are available, such as Rethink, Calm, and Heads Together. I mean, there's loads. Right. Well, I suppose I'm going to go and get ready for my hospital appointment now.
I hope it goes okay, Helena.
Yeah, I'm sure it will do. I'll update you on it later. And thank you for bringing me back from furlough to do this podcast. It's been fun.
Thanks for coming. It's been lovely having you back. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Bye.